Kia ora, Kimmy. Can I bring in a patient voice to this discussion? Cheri Ostroff is online. Cheri, can you hear us?
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and I'm also very grateful for all of the treatment I've been receiving for the past 6.5 years as a metastatic colorectal cancer patient. I'm also an academic in organizational behavior. So this is a blend of what I've observed as a patient through the lens of my field. So we know for rectal cancer patients like me, the bottom line is really important. So for me, 3 bottom line points are: we need to remember that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not the same thing. We need to think about diversity more broadly. We need to think about how we signal whether we value diversity. And the overall message is we can't fix what we don't know, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. So first, we need to remember the distinctions between DEI. Diversity is who is in the group, who are we interested in looking at. Once we know that, then we can look at equity, which is about what happens to people, their opportunities and their outcomes. And inclusion is an experience of whether people feel like they're included, valued, and respected. And there's different approaches for each of these, which is why we need to keep them separate, even though they're related. So the who is often represented by an iceberg metaphor of what we see above the surface and below the surface. I don't like this because it means a lot of people drown. And really, we all live in the yellow submarine, of course. So I've changed this so that what you see is the obvious diversity categories are at the top, and these are things that are readily visible to most people. But there's so many other dimensions of diversity that we don't see automatically. And we need to be considering which of these categories are most relevant for our purposes. And also think about, they're not all the same. So for example, you can probably tell from my accent that I am a migrant, but my experience as a migrant is very, very different than a migrant who's a person of color who may not speak English as their first language and so forth. So I would challenge AGITG to come up with a framework for all trials that includes what diversity categories we should be considering in every single trial so that we can start tracking this. If you look at other countries, you can see that other countries have well-established frameworks that everybody knows what they are. And this data is collected routinely across not just health organizations, but every organization. In Australia and New Zealand, we don't really have nationally recognized categories, so we need to develop a framework that we're going to start using. Also, as a reminder, we saw this from Vishal's presentation. Equality and equity are not the same thing, although I would change this graphic to have women and playing soccer. Equality is treating everyone exactly the same. Equity, we can address in 2 different ways if there's an inequity. One is we target individuals or groups to provide them with some extra supports or resources, as in the middle frame. The other is we change the whole system. You know, in this case, break down the fence and build a new fence. What's important about this is that these are very, very different approaches. So targeting the system means you're dealing with the top leaders or government often, and that's different than targeting individuals, which is usually where we need to start so that we can provide evidence to get some system change. Inclusion is also something that we need to think about. We focus too much on not discriminating rather than including people. So for example, you can say we don't exclude people from our trials, but that doesn't mean that people feel like they have been included and we're not tracking that, or even very small things like telling every patient Merry Christmas when a Happy Holidays would be much more inclusive. Final point is we signal whether we value diversity in multiple ways through all kinds of imaging and letters and messaging. And I'm so sorry, Peter Mack, you're a great cancer center, but this is the patient and carer page of Peter Mack on their website. Think about this from a diversity perspective. Second page keeps going. Mostly whites. This is their career page, all whites, but there's some women. Contrast that with Mayo Clinic, where you see immediately diversity. There's clear statements about addressing inequities, racism. There's diversity, clear statements about inclusiveness, statement from CEO about valuing diversity. So what we see is unintentional signaling we don't value diversity versus intentional signaling that we value diversity. Finally, evidence for the problem is different than evidence for the solution. So we need to think about the problem first and the kind of evidence to collect for the problem before we start jumping into solutions. So basically, we can't fix what we don't know. We need to be collecting much more data first so that we can fix things. And that's all I have from this perspective. I'm also very happy to answer any questions as a patient rather than a more academic perspective.